Hey everyone, my name is Lorenzo with the Clearer Method podcast. I'm joined here by Kyle, the founder of FisherCat Consulting. And share a bit more about yourself, Kyle.
Yeah, thanks so much for carving out the time, Lorenzo. So, like you said, I'm the founder of FisherCat Consulting. What it is that we're essentially building is a recruiting consulting practice dedicated to helping early stage founders establish a practical and scalable approach to hiring. For me, hard to think I've been in the recruiting space for over a decade. Started off my career on the agency side. I spent time in-house, and then more recently I was at a venture capital firm in San Francisco prior to going out on my own and starting my own practice.
Okay. What shifted for you to want to go out and start your own practice?
Yeah, so I think there was really two answers to that. I think a lot of it was candidly organic, actually. I had an opportunity just, in 2023, starting to do some fractional work and having just through my network an opportunity to be working with early stage companies. And towards the end of that year, things kind of snowballed to the point where there was enough volume where I said, hey, look, there can be a viable business here. Bigger picture, I think for me, being on the agency side and in-house, one thing that I saw was there tends to be a little bit of a gap in terms of the offering between a lot of traditional agencies and how in-house recruiting is done. And there's also the question for an early stage company, does it even make sense financially to have a full-time dedicated recruiter? So how can we bridge the gap? And I think, a lot of agencies can be very transactional. I think they're great in terms of getting a company a really solid candidate, but the question's often, how scalable is that? If you're a company that's looking to 2x an engineering team and grow from 50 to 100, depending on an agency for every single hire, is going to get prohibitively expensive. So how can we, not only tactically help out with some of the recruiting, but also partner with hiring managers and executives to think through recruiting as a process and a strategy to hopefully save them time and money as a result. So I think that's a big part of our work, is hopefully a bit of a strategic offering in terms of thinking through things like interview process, compensation bands, really just trying to streamline the actual hiring methodology.
Yeah. And when you say streamline it, are you essentially helping the business itself learn how to do the recruitment aspect, and you're letting them essentially do it themselves? So you're like a teacher, or do you still have some sort of aspect with helping them out? I don't quite get it.
That's an important question, Lorenzo. So I think while I do think the strategy is important, the reality is I don't think you can necessarily have a business behind that. The goal of recruiting at the end of the day is to hire great people. And I think having that function isn't going to go away anytime soon. So absolutely. We're in the trenches doing the work of any recruiter out there in terms of sourcing and screening and hopefully closing great candidates. But there's an added value in terms of a lot of that strategic work as well. I think I'm a believer that if the strategy is in a place where it's easy and efficient for the company to hire, some of those hires are just going to happen very organically. So kind of a chicken and the egg thing. I think that tactical hiring piece is super important. That's not going to go away anytime soon. But, if we're able to influence the interview process and really try to, streamline things, I think that's a huge added value that I don't see a lot of conventional agencies doing.
Yeah, I hear that. Okay. And with you being a founder within the business, because I saw on your LinkedIn page, there's, I believe, 2 employees you have at the moment. What is your day-to-day really looking like as a whole?
Yeah, so I'm the only person full-time right now, so I will mention that. But for me, my typical day, I'd say involves 3 things. A lot of it is just trying to connect with elite professionals in their given function, and for the firm, we're focused exclusively on technical and go-to-market roles. I think that companies really need, especially technology companies, need 2 things to be successful. They need a product and someone to build the product, and then someone to sell the product. So our focus is on the technical and then the go-to-market sales piece. So just trying to connect with great people in their given function. Secondly would be consulting and advising founders and investors that we're already partnering with. And then the third piece would be having conversations with prospective partners to continue to grow and scale the practice here.
Okay. And overall, because I know you're connecting with professionals, how does that work? Because I know recruitment as a whole, like 5, 10, 15 years ago, it was a very manual aspect on how you're approaching people. Is that automated? Because I know within the business you're advising right now, the house fund, there was a lot of mention of tech. Is that automated, or are you going out by yourself and doing outreach manually?
I'm doing outreach manually. So I think there's, and maybe this is a conversation for another time, because I think this is a very grand topic in terms of technology and what AI is going to mean for the function. But I don't know if the technology is quite there yet for me to be comfortable, just 100% letting technology do that outreach piece. And I still get plenty of messages from people who are saying, look, I got 50 recruiting messages last week. I could tell a lot of them were canned, templatized messages, or were clearly AI who wrote it. It looked like you actually took the time to thoughtfully research my background, and that's why I wanted to respond. So when I'm still getting messages like that, it's hard for me to want to, I guess, do anything differently than that. I think that's a big reason why I've been successful as long as I have. And I think it goes a long way in terms of articulating why you're reaching out with purpose, having thoughtfully researched the person's background. And I think that's kind of a big delta and a competitive advantage that I have. I think there's ways that technology can help in other ways. Research is honestly a big one. When I was starting my career, a very common exercise was, say you're working with an e-commerce company. Okay, what's the competitive landscape? What are the top 100 e-commerce companies globally? And that's where we're going to sort of pull from. That was a process that would be incredibly time consuming. And these days, with all these different, agentic AI software and tools out there, it's very easy to spin up that research in a much quicker way. Or even, when I'm typing up my notes to send over to a particular partner, that kind of time consuming, very manual piece can be cut down a lot just using some low hanging fruit in terms of the technology that's out there. I mean, maybe we will see a universe where some of the very kind of tedious, time consuming aspects of recruiting, specifically sourcing, that may be one where I think maybe there's some AI software within the next couple of years that could cut down on that piece. But I don't know. I've been a little cautious in terms of adopting a lot of AI software specifically for recruiting.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, personalization always beats like a template, right? Like, given my own personal experience when I'm sending outreach on LinkedIn, it's always a voice note. It's not like a simple message. Hey, I saw this. It doesn't really work as a whole. But I guess, given you have been, like, let's say with the changes you might be foreseeing in the next few years, you have been now in the recruitment industry for the past 13 years. What changes have you seen in terms of technology being used, the talent sourcing, the client acquisition aspects?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I don't know if there's been quite as many changes in the last 13 years as I've personally seen in the last 5 years. I think COVID definitely did a lot to change it. Even the pure function of recruiting, I think there's been a pretty big shift in terms of how companies are even thinking through that piece, and founders trying to navigate the best way to hire. Do they have an internal team? Are they relying on agencies? Is there some type of embedded fractional model that they're going with, or are they doing it 100% on their own? So I think that piece has definitely changed. 10 years ago, the default would have been, hey, let's try to build an internal team as quickly as we can while we have enough headcount that necessitates that, and then layer it in with a handful of select agencies. And I think COVID really kind of threw a wrench into that thing. I also think there's been a big rise in smaller boutique firms, lone wolf operators. That's definitely something that I think we've certainly seen over the last 5 years. And then on the technology piece, both from applicant tracking system standpoint, as well as a pure like sourcing software standpoint, I do think there's been some shifts and evolutions. I don't think that's going to be an ongoing thing, though. I think there's always going to be new software that's kind of coming up in the space, and I definitely think there's probably a really exciting way for AI to shape the function for the better, if used properly. And I don't think we're kind of seeing the full, I guess, result of what agentic AI can do for recruiting, but I do think it's coming.
Yeah. And I mean, with technology, it's always moving forward. So might be something in the background. My window's open. Anyway, technology it's always moving forward. Like 15, 16 years ago, iPhone was first released, first touch phone, and it's been progressing ever since. So yeah, it'll keep going as ahead. But I guess because I know you mentioned boutique firms, like one-man recruitment teams. That's what you've seen on the rise since COVID in particular. Why do you think that is?
I think a huge, and granted, my work's in the United States, so it may be a little bit different for you. But here in North America, anyways, I think one thing we saw was when companies were concerned about some of the economic conditions during COVID, and the first thing they did was essentially stop hiring. Next thing they did was, okay, we need to cut down the team. If we're not hiring, why do we have an internal recruiting team? So I think a lot of really talented recruiters, unfortunately, were caught up in reductions in force. We saw a lot of internal teams shrinking, and I think it was a situation where if you're a really talented recruiter, there was just a lot of instability in terms of going in-house, right? I mean, if a company was in a hiring freeze, you'd generally be the first person to go. It doesn't matter how good of a recruiter you were. So I think as a result, that's kind of been a big reason why we've seen a lot of smaller boutique firms popping up. For the more traditional legacy agencies, I think there's also the question of scale, right? Are you doing the right things to necessarily train and groom your more junior level recruiters? Are they going to get a consistent offering and service going with a partner at the firm or someone who's a little more junior? So I think that's another thing, just in terms of the serviceability. There may be instances where a company feels a little more comfortable just going with someone who's only going to take on a handful of clients, and they're really going to double down and prioritize that given relationship, maybe in a way that may be a little different than a more traditional established search firm. So I think that's kind of my 2 cents on why we've seen that trend. I think it's for the company too, it's very easy to spin up a fractional resource, get them over the hiring sprint, and then a lot cleaner to part ways with that person once the hiring's done. So I do think there's a lot of value for the companies as well.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, because I might be very wrong on this aspect. So with the in-house, this is one thing I realize now. In-house recruiters aren't as prevalent nowadays due to what happened over COVID, right? However, partnership recruitment teams, like something like yourself, is more prevalent for the reason that you still have that more one-on-one basis, but you're not part of the company, so you can still go around. And is that like what's kind of going on? Like you still have that more touch base rather than just like a typical agency which recruits and leaves.
Yeah, that's my thesis anyways, Lorenzo. That's one thing that I've personally just anecdotally observed that's been happening.
Yeah, cool. That's a interesting shift as a whole, right? But I guess for you, because you've started this business 2.5 years ago, around that area, right? How has it been going for you? You've got a warm network from the sounds of it, and you've been able to scale quite well. Like how's business?
Business has been great. So I think when I started business, I think a lot of people would probably say that it was somewhat of a tough time to be in recruiting of any type. And I think I kind of weathered that storm, and things have been going quite well. So the other thing that I think has been really advantageous is if you just look at the boom of AI and AI-centric companies on the West Coast of North America, that's certainly been keeping me busy. I think there's a lot of tremendous innovation happening in the San Francisco Bay Area, and spending a good portion of the year out there, that's definitely been keeping me quite busy.
Yeah, and I did see you're a recruitment advisor for the house fund. Like how that's been going on, I think, for a year and a half now. How's that been going?
Yeah, so the house fund specifically, it's a super interesting model. I did my bachelor's degree at University of California, Berkeley, one of the top public universities in the world. And there was an opportunity to partner with the house fund. And it's a venture fund that invests exclusively in the UC Berkeley community. They're doing some super tremendous work, especially around AI. There's a lot of compelling research happening on campus around AI centric companies. So the work there has been tremendously fun. Been able to work with some super talented founders to really kind of hire their founding teams, and then consulting and advising some of those early stage founders as well.
Mm. So you've had like a focus as a whole, like building up teams from scratch and
Correct.
around the founder. Yeah, that's really cool. And how's that been for the founders? Because they completely put their trust in you to a certain
I
degree.
would say it's recruiting is one of these things where I don't think that any firm should honestly rely 100% on one person to do the work. But if I'm able to at least, send them some quality candidates, just kind of be a thought partner for them as they're thinking about scaling the business, that's really the goal. I don't necessarily want them to be depending 100%
Yeah,
on any resource, if it's an internal recruiter or a venture partner or another agency. But I think recruiting is one of these things where it's really around building a thoughtful ecosystem that's going to allow the company to attract great talent and hopefully retain that talent. A lot of ways that can be done, but it's really about unlocking these founders' ability to hire from their own network, from who the recruiting partners may send, if the time's right, to also connect them with a more traditional agency. I think that's part of it too. But I think it's really around building a thoughtful ecosystem that's going to allow them to build a world-class team.
yeah. Setting the foundation, like the layers of
Correct.
concrete, to be able to build a good house on top of it, essentially.
Exactly. Kind of putting up the scaffolding, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, 100% does make sense. And I mean, for you as a business, being an advisor for a different business and being partnered up with multiple other businesses, like what is your goal as a company 12 months down the line from now?
Yeah, so I think to answer it very simply, expansion, I think is the biggest goal within the next year or so. Right now, part of the model too is being able to go extremely deep with the companies that we are working with, but that also means that we're not going to be a shop that has dozens of clients right now. So I think like literally we only work with a handful of companies at a given time, and I think part of it is if there is a great opportunity to be a great value add to a given company, think through how to continue to expand the model, also continue to expand geographically. I think would be interesting. Most of the work that we're taking on is either in California or New York. I do think that there's other geographies in North America that are popping up that can support entrepreneurs. So if there's opportunities to support an entrepreneur up in Boston or Austin, Texas, think through ways to do that. But yes, to put it simply, like continue to expand is absolutely the biggest goal over the next year or so.
Yeah. Mm. That's a good goal. Who doesn't have that sort of goal to expand and grow bigger? You said something that because you're very hands-on with your clients, you only have a handful of clients right now. What do you feel is preventing you to expand, like to get 10, 15, 20 clients, whilst of course keeping that same sort of efficiency, sort of deliverables? And what do you think is missing as a whole?
Yeah, no, I think that could quite literally be the multi-million dollar question, Lorenzo. I think part of it is in terms of the work that I'm doing, there's a lot of times where I feel like it's sort of like I'm building the airplane as I'm flying it. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of tactical things that I want to make sure I'm able to deliver for the companies that I'm working with, while also being really thoughtful about continuing to expand. And I think that in itself is a bit of a challenge. And one of the big blockers is just time and bandwidth, right? I think, had I taken on a dozen clients, I wouldn't want the service to necessarily drop and kind of be watered down just because I'm spread too thin. So I think that's probably the biggest thing is have time to thoughtfully have conversations that will lead to additional partnerships for the firm. Also think through hiring on full-time support and really being thoughtful about, recruiters that I know and trust and can be really thoughtful and strategic and, do great work for the companies that we're supporting. So I think that's probably the biggest thing. But I've also sort of been in this like vicious cycle where I work with a company, hire people, establish what we want to do from a recruiting standpoint. The project winds down, spin up new clients, and it's sort of this ongoing cycle. So I think just trying to be a little more strategic and think long term is probably, I think, one of the big goals to kind of get there.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, you're still quite early within starting up this business, so from the sounds of it, you've planted the seeds in the right places. It's just about really figuring out the right next step to get that strategic move to 10, 15, 20 clients. But yeah, as a whole, thanks for joining us, Kyle. Do you have anything else you'd like to share on the podcast today?
No, I mean, Lorenzo, I can't thank you enough for, reaching out and for the time. This was super fun. I mean, I think, recruiting is one of these things that I often tell founders, timing's everything in terms of recruiting. I mean, you can talk with someone who's fantastic, who, may be hitting their next vesting milestone 6 months from now, and the timing's not right for them to move. And then it's about keeping those relationships with candidates and potential companies and, really just trying to have a strong network where when the timing's right, then you can kind of step in and provide value. So I think that's kind of one thing that I'm a big believer in. Like, we're in a relationship centric business. So I think as long as, if you're a recruiter, you're willing to work hard for a company, listen to the companies that you're supporting and candidates, I think it's a tremendously fun way to make a living.
Yeah, 100%. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you everyone for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Lorenzo.